Hi everyone and welcome to Noise Busters. For those that are new to the show, here we discuss acoustics, noise and vibration with people who are working in the industry, but in a relaxed conversation. We discuss some of the latest industry news, bring awareness on how you could work towards a career in acoustics, and we also have some beer. We do this talking to people that have done it and are doing it well, and our general aim is to weave in some of the lesser known topics in the industry, such as today's topic, which is tranquility. How are you today, George? Are you feeling tranquil?
I'm good. I'm feeling particularly festive today, actually. We've got our tree up and nice. I've dressed the dog up in her Christmas attire, so it's good.
That's good. We went out and chopped our tree down about a week ago. So we go and get a permit and chop it down, pick one in the forest and strap it to the top of the car and drive it back. So it was pretty fun.
That's amazing.
And it's snowing today, so it's feeling a bit Christmassy. So it's nice and white and fluffy out there. So right, on to today's guest. Today's guest has had a varied career so far. He started off doing a general science degree, worked in a nuclear power station, toyed with the idea of starting a recording studio, and then got a proper job working in a potash mine lab. A few years later, he spent over a decade working for Ipswich Borough Council in the UK, and he was responsible for noise and pollution control. Here he also obtained a diploma in acoustics and became more involved in noise control, sound insulation testing and running the team during his time there. He then moved to Sharps, which is an acoustic consultancy based in Suffolk in the UK, specialising in many areas of environmental noise. He has also developed specialist knowledge of the effects of sound on bats, but in recent years has conducted research into links between sound and tranquility. From this, he has devised a natural tranquility method to assess the tranquility of spaces and how it might change with development. He's also somehow found time to publish the book Tranquil Spaces in 2019, which details the research and assessment of that method. We're very pleased to introduce Clive Bentley to the show. So hi Clive, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
So it's an exciting topic for us to dig into because tranquility is something that I'm aware of and George has dealt with it probably more than I have, but we really want to dig into kind of the fundamentals as to what it is and that sort of thing, but also equally as important, dive into the background of where you've kind of come from in a bit more detail. A couple of questions to start with. I guess, what made you stick with acoustics and what started your passion for sound and why did you kind of keep it as a career? Because you were very much, toying with the idea of recording studios and obviously had an interest in sound at an earlier age. So maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I didn't really choose acoustics until I was in my very late 20s. I sort of bobbed around being a bit good at physics, but not really liking many of the jobs that went with it. Worked in a power station, worked in a mine. Don't know what I was doing in the mine really. I was in a lab, but doing chemistry, which I'm no good at. And then I joined the council to deal with air pollution, which had just come in, new legislation. And that happened to be in the same department as the noise control team. Was sent on a diploma in acoustics and just it all clicked for me. The first time ever in my life I was actually quite good at something academic. So before that, really, my only other interest in acoustics was the usual sort of story of being a failed musician, really.
What would you play then as a musician?
Everything except drums, I think. Guitar, bass.
Well, they're not musicians, are they? So it doesn't count. So.
But all very badly, I'm afraid.
That's okay. It's something to keep in the background, and it's a lot of people have that kind of interest before they move in. Do you think that it has helped you during your career? Has it hindered you, or just kind of how's that been?
No, I don't think it's helped at all. I had the idea when I first went into acoustics that I might design recording studios, but I don't really enjoy building acoustics. It's all too mathematical. I like environmental noise where it's you get out and solve problems a lot more, which is more my kind of thing these days.
They're completely different. I think a lot of people initially think I'm going to go in and build concert halls and design all sorts of crazy looking rooms and stuff. But I think the reality of it is that environmental noise is it's a much more common way of going about it, I think. And kind of, I do a bit of both, a bit of building acoustics and environment. So it's, I think it's nice to have a mix sometimes, but pure environmental stuff tends to be more interesting, I find.
It's more something I can do, either building acoustics, I just get bored with it, really.
So I guess if someone is considering working in acoustics industry, would you recommend it to them? I guess if they were thinking, umming and ahhing, whether it's acoustics, electronic engineering, mechanical engineering, and how do you think is the best way of getting into it? Let's focus on environmental noise because that's your kind of bracket, I guess.
I don't really know. I mean, I came at it from a a very oblique angle in that I was in an environmental health department, sort of trying to solve pollution problems. And so I didn't really get into the academic side of it until quite late. I mean, acoustics is a great subject. It's got a wide, there's a lot of different branches of it. It sounds like quite a narrow field on its own, but obviously it's not. And obviously, if I was doing it again, I would go away and study acoustics at university, and that probably would have been the sensible thing to do. But I didn't know it existed when I was going to university back in the sort of early 80s. I think it's a good idea to do it. I think it doesn't hurt if you're going to go into environmental acoustics, environmental noise. It doesn't hurt to have quite a good understanding of local government, because a lot of what you do is involved in the planning system and trying to get permission for things, or the licensing system, or the nuisance system, and all of those things are governed by local authorities. So having a knowledge of that is actually quite helpful.
Yeah, do you think that having people understand that aspect of it and doing the degree, it's more of a nice to have later down the line, and you can kind of figure it out the way you did? Or do you think it's much easier to do it fundamentally first and kind of go the other way around?
I think perhaps my strength is in my job. My strength is in understanding the ways of the planning system, as it were, and how to present evidence and that kind of thing. And my weakness is more the technical side. People who've got the sort of MSc in acoustics or whatever, great technically, but sometimes falter when it comes to the bit where you have to give evidence and understanding what's required from that. So I don't know, swings and roundabouts, really.
Clive, you want to be careful saying that your weakness is the technical bit if you consult.
I don't think I'm too bad at it, but I'm not a whiz like some people.
You're the bit stronger, yeah.
Clive, I am also from a local authority background, and I absolutely agree with you. Is that the local authority gives you an understanding of the context of a lot of what we do, and actually understanding how a local authority works is a great strength in how you target your work and how you present it. But the local authority bit aside, obviously, the bit that I know you for is the tranquility aspect of your skill set. You've mentioned lots of other areas of acoustics, but what specifically made you focus on tranquility as a discipline or a topic?
Again, like all the important things that happen in life, it was a complete accident. One of my colleagues left, and he was dealing with a job where the client had been refused permission for a development in a woodland area because of tranquility. The local authority said it was a tranquil area, and they wanted someone to assess how much noise they were going to make and how that was going to affect tranquility. And he'd said, yes, fine, we'll have a look at that. He then left and passed it to me, and I hadn't got a clue what to do. I sort of started with WHO and then realised that didn't really get me very far. And so I started thinking about what the measurements that we already had meant, and realised I couldn't tell very much about that. I did some research into the CPRE method and found that wasn't really very helpful. I looked at the method that the University of Bradford had come up with, but that didn't really work either. And so I sort of just got dragged into this, how on earth do I deal with this kind of problem? That client ended up going away. But the bug was, I caught it, and I just had to keep going until I found the answer. And it took me about 3 years of research, but I got there in the end. I got something that works in the end.
The interesting thing about tranquility, and I suppose it'd be good to get your insight on this, is that you don't have to be an acoustician, because of there are elements of it that you could come from various disciplines. Would you say this was the correct assumption, or am I completely wrong?
I think you need to know how to use a noise meter,
mm-hmm.
And I think you also need to. I think the experience is tremendously important. I don't think you necessarily have to have a degree in acoustics or physics, but I think you would have to have a degree of experience of surveying noise in the field. I think also when it comes to working out the contributions from road and rail, if you're able to do that by measurement, that's great. But generally speaking, you're probably going to end up falling back on some sort of calculation or modelling for any sort of reasonably big site that has those influences on it. So it probably helps if you got the right sort of aptitude for that kind of thing. But you don't have to be an acoustician. A lot of the people that I've done survey work with have been just reasonably intelligent people that helped me out with the survey, and I've explained to them how to do it.
So reasonably intelligent is what you need, is the qualification you need.
You're screwed, mate. Yeah.
I don't mean it like that. I mean, someone that's sort of interested and able to not just stare at a screen and write down a number. You've got to listen as well and concentrate and understand what you're hearing a bit.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you is actually something that I've been doing very recently. It actually is how we first got talking, I think, Clive. And actually was just raising a bit of awareness on this because I think it's incredibly interesting. Is the CENV? It's the Chartered Environmentalist qualification. Is it qualification? I suppose it is. You are an acoustician with CENV, and as I understand it, I'm not aware of that many with it. And I had my interview this week, and I think it went well. It was really interesting. But I suppose, are you able to talk a little bit about what it is and the process of getting it, just in case anyone else is interested?
You might know more about it than I do at the moment, George. I haven't been involved with it for a few months. But the CENV is a Chartered Environmentalist, and the body that I'm a member of that sort of coordinates all of that is the Institute of Environmental Science. And I think they're an absolutely brilliant body. They're the best institute that I'm a member of, I think, in terms of what they do. They're much younger and more diverse, and more dynamic than some other institutions I could mention, but I won't. Although they don't tend to sort of focus so much on acoustics, they look at a much broader range of things. And there's no reason why, as an acoustician, you're any less important as a member than someone who does, I don't know, contaminated land or air quality or whatever. It's a great institution to be part of, and it's a good qualification to have. Obviously, I do a lot of time when I'm a lot of work when I'm giving evidence at inquiries and things like that, and having a charteredness after your name is sort of helpful, I suppose. So you don't be around for a while.
No, it's really good. And what I thought was really interesting was it enables you to put acoustics in the context of sustainability and sustainable design.
Enables you to have a look at the wider picture, I think, yeah.
Yes, which I think actually is probably more interesting to people than they maybe realise. It's definitely was, the type of questions that I was presented with in the process really made me think of the bigger context of what I was doing. Less so focusing on the single numbers, and it's like what are the social impacts, what are the economic impacts. One of the you have to demonstrate competencies in terms of your process, in terms of taking into account these pillars of sustainability. And the one that I thought was really useful for me was my time at local authority. It's that the planning process itself is the way you inform planners, helps them take into account all these different factors and make a decision on the balance of things. And that is essentially a microcosm of what sustainable design is and how noise interacts with that. But I suppose the thing I was going to ask about local authority, I don't think we've had anybody on from local authority yet, Dan, have we?
No, just you, yeah.
Just me, yeah. But we were just going to ask if you had any funny stories, because there was always lots of funny stories when I was there.
Funny stories from the world of noise control. Probably most of my funniest stories would probably come from things that weren't noise, things to do with when you've got filthy and verminous people and things like that, which could be quite extraordinary at times. Funny stories, I don't know. From a noise perspective, I suppose the time when it gets most exciting is usually when you've served the noise abatement notice, the person's ignored it, you're taking them to court, and they're still blaring out their music every night and disturbing their neighbours, and you end up going in with a warrant to seize their equipment. And that's usually when you get it's usually when it gets a bit hairy and quite exciting. I've had people throwing stereos out of a window. I mean, like a huge, big, enormous, full-size stereo straight out of the top window at me. I've had. I remember one time we broke into, obviously with a warrant. we went to this young lady's flat, and I have never seen anything like it. Literally, the whole floor was under about a foot of what's it called, white lightning cider plastic bottles. Sort of literally wading through this. the whole flat, not just one room, but the whole flat just had this sort of covering of white lightning. The whole place was an absolute mess, apart from there was one stereo in one corner of one room. And that was it. There was literally nothing else, apart from, which is most bizarre, a perfectly pressed single nurse's uniform hanging on a hanger in the bedroom. I don't know I don't think she was a nurse.
So that was how you actually met George in the first video.
you get to see some extraordinary things sometimes when you go to people's houses when they're
I've still got that uniform.
I mean, it's seized equipment that had little white bags of powder in it. We took it back to the house. Oh my God, what have we got
Flour.
here?
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on, but yeah, probably shouldn't say too much. It's
so you're a bit like a government rock star kind of thing then. You were just like throwing stereos out the window and...
yeah, I think people think they are sometimes, yeah. I think it's not a funny story, but I think the main thing I would say about doing it, and I'm sure you know what I mean, George, if you've been involved, is actually it can be really sad, actually, a lot of what you do, because you usually got somebody who's very upset and unhappy. Maybe there might be other things that are going on in their life that have triggered them to be annoyed by noise a bit as well. And then you've got the person on the other side who wants to live their life in a very free and easy way, and you're kind of taking that away from them. And it always feels like it's the opposite of a win-win. It's a bit of a lose-lose, really, with noise.
Yeah, definitely.
A bit of a thankless task.
Is that why you moved on eventually then? Was it?
No, I moved on because I was absolutely a square peg in a round hole at the council. At councils, again, must be careful what I say. There's a certain sort of person that works very well at the council. I'm not that person. You have to enjoy the bureaucracy of it, and you have to enjoy the way that you have to be in order to be successful, and it doesn't necessarily link well with working hard and getting results, I felt, at that time when I left anyway. It's a bit negative, isn't it? Sorry. It didn't work for me. And when I moved into the private sector, suddenly I found I could actually do something and make a difference, which is what motivates me.
I think you're right. It takes a different type of person to take the different roles, but I would say that anybody who thinks it's easy should try it. It's not easy at all, and it's actually maybe the technical side of it in some instances, may not be as complex as some of the technical scenarios that you get in consultancy, but actually the hardest bit is the subjective element, is the engagement bit. As some of the bits you're talking about is how you tell somebody there's nothing else you can do, and that's really difficult.
Yeah, you get shouted at a lot from local authority.
Yeah.
You have to develop something of a thick skin.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I'd like to dive into what Tranquility is. I kind of have a vague outline of what it might be, but I kind of want to hear from you, Clive, as the expert, what that is kind of defined as.
Yeah, it's very difficult to define what tranquility is. I think I generally start by saying tranquility is a state of mind, because that really is what it is. The point is, it's a state of mind that can be engendered by a place, and very often is engendered by a place, and it's a place that has a peaceful nature. There's all sorts of sources of guidance on it, none of them very specific about how to nail it down, but generally speaking, it's usually associated with fairly low levels of noise, fairly low levels of, I say noise, I should be careful when I say that, very low levels of sound energy, also probably not so much man-made sound or perhaps man-made things. And it's usually got quite a high amount of nature, or a relatively high amount of nature and natural sounds. Those seem to be the things that are the most important factors. And then you can break it down beyond that. You can look at, as well as the sort of level, you look at the character of the sound. You can look at how beautiful a place might be, however one describes that, and you leave that sort of thing to the landscape architects. But then you can look at things like the presence of water tends to be a really strong factor that influences tranquility. There's one of the other most important things is what the area around a site or a location is like. So if you've got somewhere like the West End of London, say, an urban area with a lot of traffic and helicopters and construction noise and people, hustle and bustle, and you go through a little alleyway into a quite well screened area, that even if that area is still quite noisy, because it's so much less of a busy area than the area around it, it can feel quite tranquil and it can have quite a value, even though if you took that same place and teleported it into the middle of the North Yorkshire Moors, it would feel horrible. So the same level of tranquility exists in both places, but the area around it affects how tranquil it seems to be to the person experiencing it. There's lots of other things like presence of bird song, how comfortable and nice the area is. Is it somewhere nice to sit or to rest? The insects biting you? Is the weather nice? Feeling of security is tremendously important for a lot of people. If I go out into an area looking for tranquility, I tend to want to be on my own or perhaps with one loved one or something. I don't want lots of people around, but actually a lot of people that come from urban areas apparently don't feel very secure when they're on their own in a sort of rural area. They like to have a few people around in order to feel that level of security.
So it sounds like it's very much to do with what you're kind of used to as your kind of happy place, I guess I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that a good way of putting it?
I suppose it could be it's a happy place. It's a restorative place. That's the most important thing. It's somewhere that you can go to restore your senses, to get a sense that you can just stop for a few minutes, I think. That's why it's so important. The psychologists say, they call it attention restoration theory, and it's basically soft fascination. So if you look at fluffy clouds floating across the sky, or if you're listening to the sound of a breeze or the wind in the trees or something like that, that evokes a degree of fascination, but you don't really have to concentrate on it. It's not a hard thing like watching a sporting match. What's a sporting match? A football match or something.
Sporting match.
It evokes that soft sort of, so you're kind of a little bit engaged with it, but not in a way that your brain really has to concentrate. So again, a computer game, you've got that switch off, but you're engaged strongly with it, so you're not getting the same degree of tranquility. And nature is the thing that seems to provide that really, really well. So there's lots and lots of things that affect tranquility. But what I found, my research concluded, was that you don't need to factor in all those things. And I did try and factor a lot of them in, particularly the visual aspect. You don't need any of those things, mostly. In sort of 99% of the cases, you can tell how tranquil somewhere is just by listening or just by evaluating the sounds that are present. That it's good enough. It's a good enough proxy for all those other things that you can usually make a pretty good stab at how tranquil somewhere is just using sounds.
So how does that fit into like acoustic quantification elements? How did they relate to tranquility? I know that you say it's not just about that, but which are the kind of key ones?
I spent a lot of time trying to find the answer to that by looking at the various papers, acoustic papers, and there isn't really anything very much out there that tells you what's quiet or tranquil. The signal to noise ratio was one. There's some sort of EU guidance for noise mapping that suggests levels that are below 40 might be okay. But then actually you can be in a place that's very tranquil, that's quite noisy, with bird song and the like. It's above 40, then it doesn't mean it's not tranquil. So it's not about numbers. But in terms of acoustics, the two sort of numerical values that you need, and you need a noise meter for, are the LEQ, the A-weighted LEQ, the overall measured noise level, and the separate from that, the noise level from road traffic noise and the noise level from rail. And the rail you have to apply a correction to add it to the noise. So you come up with two factors. One's the LRR, which is the rail and road noise, and then there's the LAT, which is the LAQ, but T for meaning to determine tranquility, because you can add some penalties into that as well. And then on top of that, you then also need the NAM and the PONS. And the NAM is the proportion of sound that is natural or man-made on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being completely or more or less completely natural, and 1 being all or virtually all being man-made, and 3 being in the middle, and so on. And then PONS, which is the percentage of time when you can only hear natural sounds. And there's various rules about how you apply the NAMs and ponses when you've got road traffic present as well, which gets a bit technical and detailed, but it's not all that technical and detailed because I came up with it, and it's not that hard.
When you talk about level, because that's always something that I thought about, is somewhere quiet always tranquil? And no, but like some of my most tranquil places when I think of tranquility are being next to really loud waterfalls, and that's where I feel most restorative. And so it's interesting that it's very hard to quantify and come up with methods that are very subjective. And I guess just including the elements of traffic and rail, is that because they're more easily quantified and everything else becomes a lot more complicated to kind of figure out?
Road traffic noise, particularly distant road traffic noise, has surprisingly little effect on tranquility unless everything else is really quiet. So if you go to, say, an urban park, if you've got a road traffic noise level of less than about 50 dB, people tend not to notice it. And if you interview, I've interviewed hundreds of people on this, and you say to them, what about this, what about that? And you say, you're next to a road at the moment, the road traffic noise level is about 45 dB or something, and how is that affecting your perception of the restorative nature of the part of the tranquility fund? I say, oh yeah, I hadn't really noticed that. I can see what you mean now that it's there. They can hear it, but they just don't notice it. It's only when it gets up somewhere between about 50 and 58 dB from road traffic, it sort of starts to become something that influences. And above 58, it becomes really important. It's that little slot there. And then as it drops off, it becomes less important. But of course, when you've got somewhere that's really, really quiet, a really nice rural area, if you put a road traffic noise in at 40, which would be ignored in an urban area, because there's nothing else going on very much, it starts to become something that's actually quite noticeable. So you kind of have to separate it out. And I don't know why. I mean, this isn't based on any theory. This is based on pure empirical evidence. This is basically machine learning, but actually done by a human.
From what you're describing, in my head, there seems to be these three different factors that you're taking into account with tranquility. You've got people's personal perception, what somebody thinks is, what I would think is tranquil is completely different to what Dan would think is tranquil. And then you've got, these areas, it's their relative tranquility. So, we're saying one place, a place in the middle centre of London, that is, that its element of tranquility is, if you've stuck it in the middle of the Lake District, it wouldn't be considered tranquil. It's just because of the context that it's in. And then there's obviously these absolute criteria. So, can we draw a line in the sand and say, this magnitude of this contributor means it's tranquil? And it just seems incredibly complicated. And I suppose, and obviously you sort of alluded to it before that, you've got your a method that you've developed and applied. But in addition to yours, what are the most commonly adopted methods for assessing and quantifying tranquility?
I'll answer that, but before I do, I will say I need to be clear that the natural tranquility method doesn't aim to allow me to look into your mind and see how you see something tranquil, because you might have a special place that you go to every day for your lunch that isn't that great, but it's special to you, so you'll score it much higher in every beauty, tranquility, any other score that you can give of goodness than someone who's neutral. What the natural tranquility method does is it gives you a neutral person's score of the tranquility of the place. You then have to interpret how other people might see it from that. But other methods that do it, I mentioned earlier on, there's a CPRE method, which is the big one, really. That, I think, has been incredibly helpful for getting tranquility into policy. It's been a brilliant campaigning tool. And it's also been useful to see how tranquility generally across the UK has been put under threat by sort of 20th and perhaps 21st century advancement, particularly of the motor car. But it isn't all that good because it uses 500 metre square grids. Anywhere that's urban is automatically not tranquil, end of story. Of course, a lot of people that live and work in urban areas wouldn't agree with that. And it's got a lot of fundamental flaws in it as well. It doesn't really take proper account of natural sound at all. So it can't really be used for planning purposes. It can't be used as a tool for working out how tranquil somewhere is and how a development would affect the tranquility. The only other, well, that's the only one that really gets used or referred to with any degree of frequency. The only other one that I know of, which I think is very much a pioneering one, was the one that was invented by the University of Bradford team. And the one that I initially tried to base my assessment methodology on. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work very well. It assumes that people's responses to road traffic are linear. It puts way too much emphasis, I think, on the on what you can see, and it doesn't really take into consideration the presence of people in any way, other than this, they happen to be in motor cars. So, although again, it sort of gives an idea of how tranquil, say, an urban park or whatever might actually be, it doesn't really help you from a planning perspective, because it's got some important bits missing.
I suppose that then leads me on to, can you describe the natural tranquility method then? I mean, I was going to push you and say, can you say why it's better than the other methods if you wanted to? But I think I can probably infer that based on the description you gave.
I think any assessment method for tranquility is always going to be fairly good at best, because you're always going to get some variation from one person to the next, even however scientifically you go about it. I think it's good because it is based not on any presupposed theory or anything else. It's based on just literally empirical evidence, things that information's been gathered, and where there's a correlation between a factor and the tranquility score, it stayed in. Where there hasn't been, it's come out. What you basically do is you assess those four things: the NAM, the PONS, the LRR, and the LAT. You record the values of each of those, and you feed those into a calculator, which can either be a spreadsheet of your own design based on all of the formulae in the back of my book, or you can just go onto the website and just tap them straight in, and it gives you a tranquility score. And then you get a tranquility score for each individual location that you've surveyed at in an area, whether that's a little urban park or whether that's a massive forest or whatever. And you can create a tranquility map of, so you put your numbers in, that's a tranquility score 6, that's 5, that's another 6, that's 4, that's 3, or whatever. And you can get a map of an area to show what the tranquility contours look like. You can then overlay what you're proposing to do, which is easier to say than it is to do, but you can do it. And you can see what the effect of what you're proposing to do would have on the tranquility of that place. And then you can look at what you can do to mitigate that. Or you can, if you're a decision maker, you can say, yes, that's okay, go ahead, or no, we're going to refuse because it would have too much of an impact on tranquility, or whatever. We've actually used it recently to help a chap quite a rich fella, owns a big hall near a road, and he doesn't want to hear the road traffic. And rather than trying to put up massive 2-mile long barriers, we're trying to design the garden area so that there's we can increase the amount of natural sound that's there, and not just to mask the road traffic, but just to make it a more diverse and pleasant listening experience for him. Don't know if that's going to go ahead because I think it might be too expensive in the end. But there's lots of things you can do. It's not just about stopping a bad thing from happening. It's also about making things better as well, in theory.
I mean, that was going to be my next question, actually, was about, have you got any examples that you're going to talk about where you've applied the method? And I suppose in particular, what's, any sort of specific challenges you had with it?
Yeah, I used it. I worked with the people who were opposing the A303 past Stonehenge. One of the claims that was made for the road was that it would make the stones at Stonehenge a more tranquil location, and it's a load of tosh. Basically, it will have a great effect on the World Heritage Site as a massive area, but where the stones are, there's so much noise from people that you don't notice the road traffic. If it disappears, it'll make virtually no difference at all to the tranquility there. If you've used it, I used it at a public inquiry a couple of years ago. It's still in its embryonic form, but that development was refused partly on grounds of tranquility, and because it would have had a bad effect on this lovely, peaceful, quiet valley. And I've recently used it for the work I've been doing on Sizewell Power Station. There's a couple of new road schemes and the 10-year construction project itself, both of which, all of which have the potential to have an impact on the tranquility of the areas around them. And I've worked with the landscape architects on that project to provide them with a natural tranquility assessment that they've then fed into their amenity and recreation assessment for the project. That's been really interesting.
So, Clive, I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of looking forward. And I know we've been, you're based in the UK, but it'd be nice to touch on any kind of knowledge you have of tranquility that's used more globally. Do you have any kind of insights on adopted policies and approaches there?
Not on adopted policies specifically. I think although in North America, I believe, or in the USA, there are some national parks which I understand have, mainly I think to respect people's religious backgrounds, no flights are allowed over them. Places that are very quiet and peaceful. Don't know very much about it, but I've read that there are, I can't imagine people doing that in the UK or in Europe. So, we're not flying over this, Dartmoor or something, but rather a wonderful thing to do, I think. I'd like to know more about it. I think the only other place that I know a little bit about globally is China. My wife's from China, so I've spent a bit of time there. And just so many people and everybody lives in these massive sort of cities that make London look like a village, and just this sort of craving for quiet spaces there. And actually, if you look, an awful lot of the more recent research has come out of places like Hong Kong. I think it's just such an appetite for trying to find quiet places. And the only other place I think I've heard about where tranquility is clearly valued very highly is in Japan, probably for very similar reasons, where people do commonly go out forest bathing. They just go to the forests to sit and walk with this express idea of it restoring them and making them feel whole again and so on. There's quite an appetite in the places that are very urbanised. I don't know, maybe you could tell me some more, Dan. What's it like where you are? I suppose you've got so much tranquility, you don't know what to do with it, have you?
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, I think with the North American stances, it's easier to kind of section out areas. So we have like areas in Canada that are national parks that are probably as big as England, so it's easy to segregate those areas a bit more. And I know it's hard because here in Canada especially, they still have things like helicopters are used a lot to kind of get, do practical things like deliver supplies to remote locations or equipment and even food and stuff like that. So it's a different way of thinking about it. But I do know that the flights are very, very high at the point that they go over the national park, especially in Canada. So I know that they protect things, but I don't think tranquility definitely isn't looked at as a assessment approach. It's very much like a logical, pragmatic approach. Is we don't really like that sort of stuff, we'll limit it. So it's sure. That kind of thing. So I think it's interesting to see that the UK is doing more of a structured assessment process. And I don't know, will like the World Health Organization start to adopt this more as we go into the future? And how do you think it will change in general as we move into the future and tranquility becomes more important in some areas, I guess?
I think it should. I think the latest batch of World Health Organization guidelines, which is for Europe only, strangely, is very much more focused on avoiding significant health effects. It's not really looking so much at promoting positive health effects. I don't know how hard this sort of thing is really going to get pushed, to be honest with you. It's only through campaigns from people like the CPRE that's really made it come to the fore. And I think the work that people are doing in soundscapes now will start to bear fruit over the next sort of 10 years. And people are already now talking more about positive sounds rather than just the negative ones.
Tying the kind of EIA or environmental traditional assessment approach to the tranquility and trying adopting and including that, how do you think those things will work together well, and can they work together well? I guess is a question as well.
I think that's one of the things that we tried to do on the Sizewell project. Obviously, the landscape architects are used to doing amenity and recreation assessments where they might very well discuss the question of tranquility. But in general, the ones that I've come across in the past haven't really looked at noise other than there'll be a bit more noise that will probably affect things, I guess, or not. It's not really been very informed. There's not really been a very close working relationship between acousticians and landscape architects, mainly, I suppose, because acousticians don't really know what to tell them. So I think, hopefully, as people start to either use my method or come up with something better, people will start to take it quite seriously and look at exactly how tranquil is this place and how important is it to protect it.
Do you think it's a requirement of legal people, at that kind of public hearing kind of stage to step up and take it into consideration more? Because we hear things getting rejected on the basis of tranquility. You've kind of referenced a few already in this conversation, but how can people make it more of a thing?
It's a good question. Most of the national parks in Britain at the moment have got some policies in place to try and protect tranquility within their areas, but they haven't defined them very well. And so it's the application of protection is very, very piecemeal, very unreliable, I think, at the moment. I think it needs something like my method or something better. It doesn't have to be my method. I think my one's pretty good, but it needs something, a good measuring tool so that you can actually define things more clearly. And then once you can do that, you're then in a position where you can do something to either enhance it or prevent damage to it or allow things to happen with it without being frightened they'll affect things when they won't really, to move it forwards. I don't know. I think the main place that is driving forwards at the moment is in urban areas where I think people are more desperate.
So how do you see things moving for you in the future? Is it pushing the tranquility thing? I know you've got the book out, but how's that? What do you see for the next few years?
For me personally, I've given up most of my private life for 4 years to do this research and write the book, followed by a period where I thought I would do a bit of book promotion. But then COVID came along and my job got incredibly busy. Whether I'll go back to it or not in earnest over the next year or two, I don't know. I think probably, in a way, I've kind of done all that I need to for now. I think the next step probably is to try and wait until the soundscape parameters have been well enough defined and in more common use, and then that might be the case that something similar to what I've done needs to be done, but using soundscape parameters rather than the sort of homemade ones that I've come up with.
Yeah, it's interesting. Soundscaping is a very much evolving thing, especially over in Europe, UK. It's not really even talked about here at all, which is a shame, but it will change. North America follows on generally from what Europe does, so I guess we'll be talking about soundscaping in a future episode. But for your book, I'm going to pick it up and read it, but where can we find more about tranquility in general? What are the good resources? Your book as well, where do we find them?
My book, type in Clive Bentley, Tranquility in the search engine, you'll get Amazon's got it, Tranquility website. There's lots of other resources there. There's the Tranquility calculator, and there's a lot more information about stuff generally to do with tranquility. You
can do the comparison stuff on your website, even as a little test to wet your whistle a bit in the tranquility world, which is quite cool. Yeah,
you can have a go at it. Yeah, it is reliable.
I've got the book. I'm holding up the book. I've read it. I've done my homework, Dan.
Is it a signed copy?
It's not yet, no, due to COVID, but I'm sure Clive will love to drive to Liverpool.
Is it worth less when it's signed, or?
I don't want to devalue it.
Well, that's anything. When I used to play in a band, we used to sign stuff and say, sorry, it's probably worth less now. So I've ruined it. Yeah, sorry.
I'm hoping in the next sort of maybe year or two that I can get out and start to bang the drum a little bit. I'd like to promote the method, more, I suppose the book, but I'd like to promote the method. And I'm hoping that maybe people start using it when they start going about defining their districts and areas and national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty and all that kind of thing. Because I think once that starts to happen, people start to use it. I think it might start to become something that people take a bit more seriously.
Okay, so I think it's time to dive in some news. So it's time to grab a beer. George, I'm going to have Dandy Brewing Company Oyster Stout. What are you drinking, George?
Classic Biera Moretti.
Nice. And Clive, you've got a beer as well, have you?
I'm for the zero carbon Brewdog.
Nice. Oh, nice.
I'm buying it for political reasons. I'm not sure it tastes that great.
Okay. Well, I'll never know, so it's all right. Yeah.
Can we cut that bit out, Dan? Because Dan and mine's only aim from this is to get free beer from somewhere, and we can't have Clive rule out Brewdog.
I really love Brewdog.
Yeah. Good.
So cheers, everyone. Yeah. Cheers, Clive. Yeah. So let's dig into some news. So I don't like to go back to COVID too much because everyone hears far too much about it, but there's apparently an algorithm that's been released that is able to detect COVID in the cough, which humans can't detect. So it's quite interesting. So that they've had quite a good success rate with people just identifying the cough. So they've used AI, in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they've published a paper on it. So they've actually been able to do this, which is crazy so quickly, and it just shows how powerful sound is. What do you think of this, George? This is one of your articles anyway, but
no, it is interesting because you know that Alberto Nito, when we hired him at AMEC, I think he did his MSc on something not too dissimilar, and it's really interesting because they use transducers and it uses machine learning to understand certain physical traits. And why it's powerful, well, I think it's powerful, is it means it's international, isn't it? Basically, you can, you don't need you need less so of the expertise of doctors. You just have this algorithm that you can send to anywhere with, some microphones or transducers, and that's a way of passing on that knowledge cheaply into, poor countries. And I think this is another great example of the power of that and how it could be used.
But it's 80% success rate, so that's really good. I don't know, that seems crazy. You don't have to go and get tested, you have to wait for ages. You just probably, when they get it going properly, it's probably almost instantaneous. This software could figure it out. Clive, any thoughts?
I'm amazed that machines can do these things. Well done. I think there's so much information in sound, and it's so difficult to interpret using theoretical stuff that, some empirical machine learning thing is the way forward, really, I think.
I think identifying that kind of clever use of the algorithm and AI learning, I want to dive into the next article that I found, which is they posed the question, could your vacuum cleaner be listening to you? So it's just kind of the darker side of machines. So this is apparently, these robotic household cleaners that go around, apparently they can be manipulated, and they've done it with unfortunately a lot of success, and they can do it with the LiDAR system in the vacuum bot, and they can start to interpret sounds and recognize TV shows and pull conversations out of them. So that can actually be done through sound as well. So has anyone got one of these? I've ummed and ahed about getting one, but no, I don't know if someone's listening to my dull conversations. I don't know.
No. I mean, my thought with these things is, things like data security is, I live an incredibly mundane life. It's like jokes on them. Just me
tuning into you.
They better like AC/DC, otherwise they're going to be pretty...
On that note, if everyone could subscribe who hasn't already, and tune in for more of George's anecdotes. But yeah, I was really surprised how well they could do this already. They were kind of reversing the LiDAR information, and they could actually, it's crazy what they do. University of Maryland have done it. Showed the concept using deep learning techniques to recover speech and identify television programs playing in the same room as the device.
So many clever people, isn't there? I mean,
what part of the vacuum cleaner is the microphone?
Because they don't have a microphone, so it uses the LiDAR and detects it in a way that stuff shakes in the room when there's sound present. So it detects and then can somehow back calculate the actual sound. It doesn't have a microphone. That's the crazy thing.
Amazing.
One more. George, do you want to do this one? The Chuck Yeager story.
Oh yeah. No, this is the one I just spotted today. It was mainly because I had a model of it when I was younger. It's the Bell X1 rocket plane. I mean, I suppose it's the aircraft that a guy called Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in 1947, I think. Even when I was younger, I remember thinking it's called a rocket plane. You have to be absolute maniac to fly in that. And it did whatever 760 miles per hour, whatever the speed of sound is. And actually, that plane, I was just reading earlier, has actually gone up to 1,600 miles per hour. But I thought what was interesting about it is that that actually he was saying what a letdown it was when he actually broke the sound barrier. He thought it was going to be this big thing, but actually nothing really happened.
Yeah, because they thought everything was going to fall apart, didn't they? Like the plane might go into bits, and didn't happen.
No, then he. I thought it was quite good. I saw a quote from his book where he said, I thought it was going to be a big thing, but then nothing really happened. But then later on, I realised that the mission had to end in a letdown because the real barrier wasn't in the sky, but in our knowledge and experience of supersonic flight, which I thought was quite good. But it was, was what an incredible human being and what a maniac.
What a guy. I mean, I don't know if I could do that. I'd probably be sick at that point. I don't travel very well at the best of times, but like flying at 1,600 miles an hour at the equivalent now is, I don't know, insane. Has anyone ever thought of traveling that fast? I haven't.
No.
Talking about going to the moon and like traveling to Mars and stuff like that. Well, I don't know. I think I'd be sick most of the way there.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Do you have any thoughts on this, Clive? Were you aware of this happening? And
speed of sound barrier being broken. I remember when I was a little boy, I used to have a big poster on the wall of the fastest fastest planes and cars and things like that. So when I was 10 or something, I thought it was rather exciting. It's not really my thing nowadays, to be honest with you. I'm quite happy walking or cycling. A bit boring.
Not a boy race.
Electric bikes now. Yeah.
Not anymore. No.
He's dealt with enough of them at the council. So.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I kind of. I don't know. It's that whole global warming thing. Really, it keeps tapping me on the shoulder whenever I start thinking about doing things that aren't very green. A downer, really, isn't it?
Cheers, Clive. Cheers.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, sorry, Chuck. It basically, you wasn't very sustainable what you were doing.
Oh, really? Not very tranquil either.
Yeah. Cool.
Stamp of unapproval from Clive Bentley. Yeah, okay. Cool. Well, it's been great to have you on, Clive. I really appreciate your time and giving some insight into the world of Tranquility.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been fantastic. Yeah. So, if anyone wants to read more, please dig out Clive's book on Tranquility and search for it it's all over the internet and stuff. So, if you're watching video, please put a like and a comment below. We always appreciate getting those from people that are interested in getting into acoustics, and we're happy to kind of chat through anything that you have questions about. Sharing the video is great on LinkedIn. We see people sharing all the time, people we don't know, so it's fantastic. And if you're listening on the podcast, if you can rate the podcast, leave a review and kind of follow and subscribe, all those sorts of things, it would be fantastic. So if you have a story to tell or are working on something interesting that you want to kind of talk about on the show, happy to hear any kind of about people. So you can email us at noisebustersdb@gmail.com, and we're happy to kind of get in touch to discuss that more. We have a few more exciting topics coming up in future episodes. We have someone to talk about speaker arrays and the design of those and speaker design. And we've also got a guest talking about the kind of consultation process and how it needs to improve. So thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.